Good afternoon, students. Today, again, I have come back with a new chapter, An Elementary School, written by Stephen Spender. Today's objective of the lesson is to make a more socially aware as a responsible citizen of our great nation. Today, in this class, I'll introduce yourselves with Stephen Spender, the poet. I'll give you over poem, background of the poem, as well as form and structure of the poem. So let me introduce with the poet Stephen Spender first. Stephen Spender, an English poet, novelist, and essayist who lived across most of the 20th century, having been born in 1907 and dying in 1995. In 20th century era of a great technological and scientific advancement, change and innovation, and obviously such change would dramatically affected the lives on the who lived that time. Some changes were indeed definitely not. So people like Stephen Spender to bring out these social and anomalies that existed in the society time to help us to be more aware of such injustice that had melted section of the society. Being a literary artist, Spender used his works in his poems, novels, essays as a tool to gain attention or focus on the ways which needed to be right in the soul of his time. Next, I would discuss and give you overview of the poem. Stephen Spender highlights the plight of the children in a government-run school, depicting the kind of education. It is a sort of education which hardly does any good, but on the contrary, he serves only to draw more attention to the deprivation and sorry state of affairs in which these children find themselves. On the other side, while the government appears to doing its best, the relevance and quality of its education is highly questionable. Also, the general attitude of apathy on the part of the more privileged members in a society towards these who are less privileged was very disturbing to Spender. And this background, he started writing elementary school classroom in a slum. Next, the background of the poem, which links you to the contextual text of the poem. The poem was written in 1964. It is an example of Spender's political voice resonating in a poem. He expresses his ideological position on government, economics, education. The students in this classroom are underprivileged and malnourished. The capitalistic government is supposed to supply equal opportunity for education, but the classroom in the slum offers little hope for change or progress. Spender names no nation or race. It appears to be a response to the global question concerning social injustice, essential issue in the American civil rights movement of the time. Throughout the poem, the poet's tone changes from pensive towards more horrific idea or the society that was based on that particular time. The apathetic attitude and the negligence of these people by the privileged class of our society. And that was the biggest concern of Stephen Spender, who used this poem as a tool to fight against those people who only considered themselves that they were affluent in the society but did not contribute much to uplift these poor children. The poem is a greatest example how we should contribute to uplift these poor children in our society. Okay, next I will discuss the theme of the poem. The poem touches upon the themes of social injustice and class inequality. So basically, the poem is based on upon social injustice and class inequality. It questions the value of education in Islam, and it exposes the widespread neglect of these children who are uncared for like rootless weeds. It gives the readers a description of these children with pale faces, growth, and twisted bones. But the poem does not dwell upon pessimism. I was discussing yesterday also. Optimism means positive thinking, and pessimism means negative one. So this poem also, like that My Mother at 66. Next I would discuss the form of the poem. What is the form and structure? You must know. The form or structure of a poem is written asking about the style of the poem. That means in which manner or in which way the poem is written. It questions about the poetic devices and images. The prosodic part, rhetoric part and the prosodic part. What is the part? That poetic devices and or the structure of the poem. Okay, so it narrator's feelings of sympathy and anger. The images, what are the images? That creating picture. When you read the poem, pictures are coming in our mind. We are reading this poem, what type of pictures come in our mind? Like the picture of the slum children, the poor people, their class, their deprivation of the about the state schools in the slums, but the whole poem is dwelling upon the role of government education, which is again questionable, is vividly and beautifully Stephen Spender. Okay, this was the form. Again, I will take you to the background of the poem because written at the time crash. Stephen Spender had the lack of education that time because he only confessed by himself that he hardly passed any exams in the school, who, even though lack of education, to write something about these children who were definitely negligent by the privileged class of our society. So when he tried and used to write as a tool to fight against this oppression and social injustice, he wrote this poem. The poem is acclaimed as one of the finest poems that is written on the theme of social injustice and class inequality. It deals with a sort of education which is very much prominent in today's Indian country, where the government's role of education and the running of the government school system is highly questionable. So the Stephen Spender wrote this poem is very much linked and associated with today's government schools system. It questions upon their role, their relevance, and their attitude how to run a school. So today's class, what I discussed is very important, and I started the poem with one objective. What was the objective of the poem? To make a more socially aware as a responsible citizen of our great nation. So after reading this poem, we must learn the value of how to be a responsible citizen of our great nation and how we inculcate the moral values to contribute something to our society. So the poem is really a social mirror in which we should develop our moral culture and we should respect our great nation as a citizen of our country. Tomorrow, I'll discuss the whole poem in detail. That means line by line explanation you'll get in tomorrow's class. So next, it is a time for me to take your questions. So ask one by one. Wherever you get stuck, did not understand whatever I have discussed in today's class. Okay? Ask me. Today what I discussed about the poet, objective, okay, overview of the poem, theme of the poem, background of the poem, and form and structure of the poem. Tomorrow I'll discuss the whole poem in detail. That means line by line explanation you will get on tomorrow. Today this was the class. Now ask me the question. Theme you must note down somewhere. Please repeat background of the poem. Okay, background I'm discussing now again. Any more questions? Let me take all the questions first. Background of the poem I'll discuss now again. Very important. Any more questions? Theme you must write down. Social injustice. Okay, and class struggle.